Hi everyone, welcome to week 2. In this lesson we're going to look at creating two different types of graphs using the average and standard deviation that you learned how to do last week. The first thing we're going to look at doing is a bar graph, and the second thing we'll look at is a line graph, and kind of when to use these different types of graphs. Now obviously you've looked at how to do average standard deviations last week, but I'll show you again anyways very quickly. The reason we want to look at doing graphs is because people don't actually like looking at lots of sets of data, as I'm sure you're already aware. Right? People would prefer to look at a graph that depicts everything than troll through massive tables of data, which in reality they don't want to see all your raw stuff, they just want to see the actual outcomes of statistical analysis. So the first thing we're going to look at is a bar graph. Now a bar graph is good if you've only got a couple of people to compare against. If you've got big groups, it's not always ideal, especially if those groups have time points, and we'll have a look at a set of data that's quite large in a second. Alright, but for an easy set of data like this one, we've got distance ran over 4 different runs, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and we've got participant 1 and 2. So all we want to do is compare how far these two have run as an average over the 4 runs. Okay, so looking at the calculating average equals average, open your brackets and highlight your data, click enter, and we can drag that across to save time. And standard deviation equals stedev, open brackets, highlight your data, push enter again. Okay, if you can't remember what these mean, go back to lesson 1. But essentially your average is represented, one number representing the entire group. So this person 1 over 4 runs ran an average of 2.525, and participant 2 over 4 runs ran 2.925. Standard deviation basically tells us how accurate the average is. Okay, the higher the standard deviation, the less accurate the average. Now to represent this in a graph, that would be expected to see at university, using your average as your main bar elements and your standard deviation as error bars. Okay, for a visual representation of this data, you would do the following. Insert bar graph, click off the data for a second, insert bar graph 2D column. Now you can, some people will know how to do a graph by highlighting the data. However, I've always found it easier to start with a blank canvas, because when you get to a big set of data with more than just 2 time points, it becomes very difficult to get Excel to perform the way you want it to and input the data the way you want to on your graph. It's just easier to start from scratch, so that when you get into more complicated graphs, it works first time, rather than having to kind of play around with it once all the data has been inputted in. So once you've got your blank 2D column chart, right click, select data, and go to legend entries. So that's where we're going to start adding our data. Click add. In series name, I want to put participants 1 average in first. So I'm going to put participant 1 in the series name and delete everything in the series values box. In the series values box, I'm going to click on average for participant 1. Okay, we can see that it's highlighted the cell B7, which is correct. Click OK. Okay, so participant 1 scores are in, and I want to add again. I want to put participant 2 data in. Again, delete what's in the series values box and click on the average for participant 2. Click OK. Okay, and then go to the graph, and we can see here that both of our data are in out in. Now there's a couple of things that people don't really want to see on graphs. One is the lines in the background, we can delete them. In the case of this graph, we don't need anything on the bottom axis, so we can delete that. What we do want to see though is a key. So if you click on add chart elements, click on legend, and we also want to see some axis titles. Okay, not necessarily for this one because we actually don't need it because we have a legend. I want to move that corner there and make this graph as big as I can possibly make it. And on this axis title, we want to type in distance. So again, this data is telling us distance run of each person as an average over 4 runs. Okay, so what we've got here is a bar graph so far. Right, you don't want to rotate this title, and at the minute it's looking pretty good. Now in terms of actually the design of the graph, when you're at university, and even here potentially, you might have to print off some work. Now if you printed off that in black and white, those are going to look exactly the same colour. Colour print is super expensive. Okay, so it's easier to make sure you change the colour for here. Instead of having red and orange, or blue and orange, or whatever it is, then you want to change it to grey and black. Okay, so go to change colours, Right, so when you print that off, if it's in black and white, then you'll still be able to tell the difference between the data used in your legend. Okay, so that's a fairly decent graph so far. The only other thing that you want to do is remove the background. So we don't want any border around the back of the graph, because when you copy and paste that into a Word document, then the border will be there. And it just looks a bit naff really once it's in your Word document. So the next step is to start to add error bars on. Now the error bars are basically a visual representation of standard deviation, so that when someone's looking at this diagram, they can see, one, what your average is, and two, how accurate that average represents the group. Okay, so the way to do that is I'm going to click on participant 1 first of all, and then I'm going to click on add error bar. And if I click on this little arrow over here, I'll get more error bar options. So go to more options, and basically what we want to do is represent our error bar using our standard deviation. So you can decide whether you want to have the direction of the error bars, so going up on the graph and down the graph, whether you want just to go down or whether you just want it to go up. So in my case, I just want my error bar going upwards. So I'm going to keep plus here and then scroll down to the bottom, and I want to use my standard deviation data point for my error bar. So I'm going to go to custom and specify a value. Now because I've only got my error bar going upwards, I only need to change the positive error value. If you were doing both or even minus, you would have to change the box as well. So for me, just the positive. I'm going to delete what's in that box, and I'm going to click on standard deviation for person 1. Okay, and click OK. Now you can see my error bar is adjusted to be 1.05633. Okay, as a visual representation of that data. I want to do that as well for participant 2. Okay, so again, plus, go to error bars, more options, and again I just want the error bar going upwards. Custom and specify a value, and again I only want to change the positive bar, and I'm going to put in 1.697793. Okay, so now what we have is a bar graph that depicts both my average and standard deviation. So when someone, an academic, a tutor, a lecturer, or even yourselves, you and your peers, look at that graph, they can see, one, what your average was by looking at your bars and who had the higher average out of the two people, and we also see the error bars representing the standard deviation, showing us how accurate that average is. Now in terms of this data, we can see that, yep, participant 2 clearly had the higher average over the 4 runs, but the standard deviation is much higher in participant 2 than participant 1. So there's potential there to argue that that average that participant 2 has is not particularly accurate. And then you can go back into the data and start to look at maybe why not. So for example, in the first run they only ran 1.1, whereas on the fourth run they ran 5 kilometers. So you can start to question your own data, or someone else can question your data depending on who's reading it. Okay, so the second thing is a line graph. Now essentially a line graph is good if you have lots of data, alright, for groups of individuals over given periods of time. Okay, so what we've got here are 2 different groups that we want to compare between 6 participants in each group and distance they've run over 4 time points, 5, 10, 15 and 20 minutes. So the first thing I want to do here is again calculate my averages. Okay, so I'm going to do this very quickly. Look at the way I'm doing this. Standard deviation for each thing. Again, same data as my average, and do it quickly. Highlight them however you want. If you want to highlight them, you don't have to. And the same on the other side. So you can either follow me along, or you can just keep pausing the video for whenever you want it. So, almost got all of my average standard deviations that I'm going to use for my graph. So once I've done that, I'm going to go through the same process as I did with the bar chart, apart from obviously I've got more data to input. So again, for a line graph, insert, this time line, and I'm going to go 2D line again. I'm going to go with a blank canvas. Okay, you can try highlighting the data if you want, it's up to you. Right click, select data, and the first thing I'm going to add in are my averages for group A. So I'm going to put group A there. I'm going to delete everything in the series values box, and I'm going to highlight my averages for 5, 10, 15 and 20 minutes and click OK. I want to do the same for group B, but I'm going to have to make sure I can actually see the data, otherwise I won't know where I'm clicking. So I can move everything across. Right click, select data, and add the second series. So I'm going to call that group B. Delete your series values and highlight your averages for those times again. Now what I also want to represent on this graph, instead of 1, 2, 3 and 4, I want my bottom axis, my y-axis, x-axis even, to highlight my time points, 5, 10, 15 and 20 minutes. So I'm going to click edit, and where it says axis label range, I'm going to highlight what I want to read across the bottom. So you can see at the bottom there of my graph, I've now got 5, 10, 15 and 20. Now again, same principles apply. Delete the pesky lines in the background, change the colours to black and grey so that you can print them off. We also want to add in our legends. We want to add axis titles on both this time. On the bottom, oh wowzers, had a stinker there, managed to delete the graph. Right, we're back. So we were here. So what I want to do is change my axis title at the bottom to time in minutes. I want to change my axis title here to distance in kilometers. Okay, so what we can see is the averages for each group over time against distance. Okay, so this is looking quite nice. Again, I'm going to move this so I can make the graph as big as I possibly can, because that's the whole purpose of the graph. You want to make the graph as big as you can rather than see anything else. Now this time, instead of having my error bars kind of on both, what I want to kind of do is try not to cross them over. So for the top line, group B, I'm going to have the error bars going upwards, and for the bottom line, group A, I'm going to have the error bars going downwards so that they don't actually cross over and people get confused as what is what. So to do that, we'll start with group A. So I'll move my graph so we can actually see group A's data. Click on the line, okay, and go to error bars. Same principle applies, more options, and for that one I just want the error bars to go down. Go to the bottom, custom, specify value, and again, because we're going down on the error, we just need to change the negative values. So highlight your standard deviations. For the negative error value, click OK, and your error bars will change to be going down and standard deviation. Top line for group B, okay, I'm going to have the error bars going upwards. So error bar, more options. Where's my options? Delete that. There we go. I just want that to go up. Again, custom the value, specify value, and because it's just positive, I only want to change the positive values. Highlight your standard deviations and click OK. Okay. So what I've got is a line graph with standard deviation represented on each one. Okay, showing distance over time or for time for two groups. Again, nice visual representation of all the data that we've collected and the stats that we've performed on each one. A bar graph and a line graph. Right, I want you to go away, look at the mock set of data please, and do a bar graph and a line graph yourself, following the same things. The last thing to do on this graph actually is make sure there is no border. Okay, so when you actually put it into a Word document, it doesn't look all nasty. Thought I'd just quickly show you what I meant by the borders when you kind of copy and paste them into Word. Obviously the top one has no border and the bottom one does have a border, and the bottom one looks rubbish compared to the top. To finish off these diagrams inside your Word document, we'll look at in another video. Okay, so enjoy. If you've got any questions, email me.